Hello, everyone who's being admitted into here. My name is Michael. I'm the host of Annie Bloom's Books, and thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. I'm also the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store, we're located in Portland, Oregon, in the heart of Multnomah Village. The store's been around for a little over 40 years. We're still plugging along despite the pandemic and everything that's going on. Our store is currently closed to browsing, but there's staff there at the store every day from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. to answer phones and reply to emails. They love to hear from people looking for book recommendations, so give them a call or shoot them an email, get in touch. And our website is always open, www.annieblooms.com, so you can go in there and purchase stuff all the time. We have curbside pickup, local delivery within 3 miles of the store, and various shipping options. And we have a bunch of great events coming up after this one. On Tuesday, the 6th at 5 p.m., we have Richard Kreitner, a nonfiction book called Break It Up. It's about the history of secession in the United States. On Thursday, the 8th, we have local authors to Portland, Joanna Rose with Stephen Allred. They co-host a weekly writing group called the Pinewood Table. They're sort of luminaries in Portland. They're great. And Joanna Rose has a new book out that she's promoting. On the 15th, Thursday, we have Hawaiian author Charles Subi with his short story collection, A View from the Borderline. On October 20th at 7 p.m., Scott Nadelson, who used to live in Portland and is now, I think, down in Eugene, maybe, his new short story collection, One of Us. And then we have on the 27th, 7 p.m., David Beispiel, who runs the Attic Writers Workshop here in Portland, along with the author Vanessa Visalka, who has a brand new novel out. So lots of good stuff coming out. But tonight, we are delighted to be hosting Jessica O'Dwyer and Katey Schultz. They have pre-signed copies of the books available to order. I will post a link for that in the chat right now. I think I've got it in my clipboard. Yep, there we go, boom. And so yeah, feel free to jump on over there to Annie Bloom's anytime and order that book up. Even if you already have a copy, where everyone's encouraging people to shop really early for the holidays right now. So, you know, pick up extra copies for your loved ones. We do gift wrapping at the store. After the event, or after the reading portion of the event, there'll be a Q&A session. So we're encouraging people to put their questions in the chat and I'll read those to the authors. So first up for this evening, we have Jessica O'Dwyer. She is the adopted mother of 2 teens born in Guatemala, a vocal proponent of open adoption and lifelong connection to birth country. Jessica speaks on these subjects at culture camps, book clubs, and to anyone who will listen, including you folks here tonight. She and her family travel to Guatemala for a month every summer to visit her children's birth families. Jessica is the author of Mamalita, an adoption memoir named Best Memoir by the San Diego Book Awards. Her essays have been published in the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, Marin Independent Journal, and elsewhere. An alum of writing conferences at Squaw Valley, Breadloaf, and Sirenland, Jessica earned an MFA in fiction writing from Antioch, Los Angeles. She lives in California with her husband, son, and daughter. Her novel that she's reading from tonight, which is just out now, is called Mother, Mother. It's about a married couple, Julie and Mark, in California, grappling with race, betrayal, love, and loss when their son comes home from a Guatemalan orphanage. At the same time, the birth mother, an indigenous Ixil Maya, navigates her own tumultuous path, beginning with surviving a horrific massacre. In this gripping tale told from alternating perspectives, both mothers must draw on fierce inner strength to reckon with their life choices. Jessica O'Dwyer.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And it's such an honor to be here at this bookstore. Thank you so much for hosting me and to appear with Katey Schultz, my fellow Apprentice author. And thank you to everyone who came. I know that there's a bunch of Zoom fatigue out there, or so I've been told. And I'm just delighted to see so many friends here to share this joy, because you guys know I've been working on this novel for 7 years. Doing lots of research, travel, and investigating. And so here it is. So I am going to begin reading. I'm going to do a short reading for about 5 minutes. If you want to follow along, not that you do, but if you do, it's on page 34. It's kind of in the beginning of the book. So what I'm just going to set the scene with one little note, and that is, this is Julie, the adoptive mother, who is visiting her son Juan in his orphanage in Guatemala City. And he has just been moved to this new orphanage, and here they are. They pass through blocks of cement row houses with roll down aluminum doors and streets full of dusty cars and packs of roaming dogs. They were deep in the Guatemala they saw on the news, but had never experienced in the Marriott Hotel neighborhood. Almost there, Carlos, the cab driver, said. A few blocks later, he yanked the steering wheel to the left and pulled up to a driveway in front of a cement wall with a massive steel door. Leaping out of the driver's seat with the engine running, he spoke into a keypad and the gate creaked open. A guard in an orange vest waved them in, and Julie turned to see the gate creak shut and the orange vested man secure it with a steel bar. A two-story concrete block building stood at the end of a dirt driveway. Every window was barred. Although the orphanage housed 60 children, there was no physical evidence of children. No scattered toys, no bicycles laid on their sides, waiting for a girl or boy to jump on and pedal. Aside from the dirt itself, the dirt courtyard was spotless. Along the edge of the driveway, 10 to 15 teenage boys and girls sat on a low wall, leaning into each other and chatting, tossing pebbles at the ground, or simply staring at Julie as the car drove by. They were waiting for family to visit, Carlos explained with a gruff snicker, except family never did. Not once had Carlos ever seen a relative visit the orphanage. Do you think they'll let me give him the cake and photo album, Julie asked, as they pulled into a parking spot. Juan loved tres leches cake. She'd brought a cake along with a photo album of Mark, her husband, and her on a hiking trail in their garden, cooking in their kitchen stove. Carlos dug a tip of one steel-toed boot into the dirt of the courtyard and shrugged. Orange Vest walked over and met them at the front door. No photographs, no cell phone, no notebooks, he announced. Julie lifted the cake box with the photo album on top. Okay? The guard didn't say yes and he didn't say no. Instead, he held out his hand for her camera and cell phone and slid each one into a pocket of his orange vest. He held out his hand again and she gave him the photo album, wondering if she'd ever see any of those things again. He led them to the front door and selected a key from a ring clipped to his belt. Inside smelled strongly of bleach. They skirted past 3 teenage girls with buckets on their knees, silently washing the linoleum floor with wire brushes. Close by, an older woman stood by and watched them. In the middle of the hallway, swinging doors were propped open with 2 bricks to show a large room filled with long industrial tables and benches. On the wall was a blackboard chalked with the menu del dia, lunes, martes, miércoles. The scrambled eggs, the champanadas. Julie's hands tightened around the cake box. She knew Juan would like it. The guard led them further down the hallway and unlocked another door. The waiting room was bare, the only furniture a couch covered in brown corduroy, flattened and shiny, and a scuffed wooden end. 3 narrow windows were closed and barred. I'll wait outside, Carlos said, and he and the guard left. Julie placed the cake on the end table and stood next to the corduroy couch. Years ago, she and Mark had visited Alcatraz, and a Park Service warden locked them into a cell to simulate the experience of jail. When Julie heard that door slam shut, she had almost hyperventilated, banging on the metal and begging him to let her out. She had the same feeling of lightheadedness now in the waiting room, of being locked in with no escape. She forced herself to inhale, then exhale slowly on 3 long counts. She couldn't crumble. She needed to stay strong for her son. A few seconds later, a stout woman in a blue apron appeared, leading Juan by the elbow. A shapeless gray jogging suit hung on the boy's frame. His head was shaved and his cheeks hollow. He saw Julie and stopped short. Mommy, He burst into tears. Julie reached for him, craving him, her hand just grazing his shirt, before the caregiver jerked on his elbow and shushed him. Juan stopped crying instantly. A shudder shot through Julie's body as Juan instantly obeyed, as if anticipating severe punishment if he didn't. Julie's instinct was to ask the woman, to tell him, to stop jerking and shushing Juan. But Julie sensed she'd only make her son's life more miserable if she did. Thanks for listening. That's it.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So next up is Katey Schultz. Katey is the author of Flashes of War, which the Daily Beast praised as an ambitious and fearless collection, and the one she's reading from tonight, Still Come Home, a novel both published by Loyola University, Maryland. Honors for her work include the Linda Flowers Literary Award, Doris Betts Fiction Prize, Forward Indies Book of the Year Award for both titles, 5 Pushcart nominations, a nomination to Best American Short Stories, and writing fellowships in 8 states. She lives in, is it Silo, North Carolina? She lives in North Carolina and is the founder of Maximum Impact, a transformative mentoring service for creative writers that has been recognized by both CNBC and the What Works Network. Katey's novel, Still Come Home, is about 3 characters who are each searching for the best way to be, the best way to live, all the while fighting cultural, societal, and political forces far beyond their control. As their paths intersect over the span of 3 days, Still Come Home explores how their decisions will forever alter each other's lives. And now, Katey Schultz.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for that introduction. I just want to applaud Jessica one more time. This is her book launch. This is like, it's really a really special, exciting thing. Will you hold the cover up?
Woo!
I just really want to honor that. Congratulations, and it's a pleasure to get to read with you. I'm also going to read a very brief excerpt, about 5 minutes, and then for those who don't know, we're going to answer 2 questions in particular about our works that we have in common, and then Michael will take us through questions from there. And just a plug for buying books or buying books as gifts from Annie Bloom's. Annie Bloom's is one of those bookstores that I can still smell when I close my eyes. It was where my parents took me very often as a child. I grew up very nearby there. And a year ago, they hosted me for my West Coast launch. So just thank you. And big love, indie bookseller love to you guys. So all you need to know, boy, is it hard to choose 5 minutes from 250 pages, but we're just gonna give you the basics. This little bit I'm gonna read from a chapter that focuses on Nathan Miller, who is a soldier, and he is on his 4th tour in Afghanistan at this juncture in the novel. What you need to know is that he just found out about a change in the rules of engagement for what he is and is not allowed to do on the ground in his missions in Afghanistan. And the change that has been made is really terrifying to him. It is the straw that breaks the camel's back at the very end of his very last tour of his career. By the end of the message, Nathan Miller feels cross-eyed. He swivels on his desk chair, unlocks a drawer, and grabs 1 bottle of Percocet. Still plenty left should he need them, though even now, his first time opening one of the prescriptions, he questions his judgment. 3 tablets, then chewed and swallowed with a quickness, the bitter sting a welcome distraction. His Ritalin chaser comes with a surprising ease, as though Miller is watching someone else's hands do the swift work. The twist and pop, the tapping of pills. He crushes two into powder with the bottom of his stapler, and just like he has seen in movies, at off-base parties back home, on YouTube even, arranges it in lines, and then it's gone. A few minutes? An hour couldn't be. His mind is so soft, humming white noise and elasticity. First snowfall in a hardwood forest, the daring tracks of rabbits through powder. First kiss, not his wife Tenley, but a girl named Sandra from art class, permed hair and a quick tongue. First finish line, back in his 5K days of blacktop and sprints. First art museum, that traveling Van Gogh exhibit, and he didn't care if it were every other would-be painter's story too. He'd been transfixed. Brushstrokes across canvas, across centuries, across his eyelids, and then gone. Blinked away with a signature and National Guard promotions. First time he didn't stand up for a friend being bullied. First time he broke a girl's heart. First time his daughter Sissy cried, not for nursings or at vaccines, but at goodbye and goodbye and goodbye. This fourth tour, to be a father, to be fathered. First spanking. That memory forces Miller from his desk to pace the hallway. H4, Indiana, in the aftermath of a summer thunderstorm. Nathan walked to the end of his long driveway where dirt met asphalt, 2-lane Indiana State Highway 67 stretching for miles. Here, the ground that only ever seemed to give up corn gave up something else. Earthworms, droves of them writhing across the blacktop as if in pain. Nathan looked left, looked right. The puddled highway heaved with beautiful, slender creatures that his kindergarten teacher had told him did the most amazing, invisible work underground. He looked left, right again, then left one more time. The big rigs would be coming soon the way they did, dozens of them every hour, splashing between one town and the next. The earthworms were helpless in the aftermath of the downpour, turning in circles, already starting to cook as water evaporated from the road. Nathan wanted to save them, every single one. For show and tell, he'd be able to brag about it, explaining how he had done his part to keep the Miller family corn's reputation as best in the county, maybe even best in state. He imagined a vast colony of worms beneath his family's fields, moving through the soil, helping the corn breathe. He named them as he walked down the center of the highway, placing them gently out of harm's way. Morris, Danny, Sean, these names from his cousins, the ones that came to mind first, then Scooby, Grover, worms, walk, walk, worms, and then it came. His father's voice, like a mad roar, Nathan pulled by the arm, shoulder whipping back as his head snapped like a knot at the end of a rope. Only 50 yards or so from his own driveway, but still over the double yellow line. And my God, boy, you could have been killed. His father, breathless, what were you thinking? And Nathan felt the sentence on the tip of his tongue. That I could save them, Daddy, that they could help our crops. But there wasn't time. Nathan's pants down, bare ass to the sun, a truck blazing past, the whoosh of dust and dirt whipping around them. Was it horns from the semis that rang in his ears, or the hurt of it, his father's palm hot and fast, making a point so that Nathan never forgot? No difference, really, between being held back when he could have saved more earthworms and what these new rules of engagement in Afghanistan will bring into reality. Except these were human lives, limbs that didn't regenerate when cut in two. Families that didn't regenerate either. Thank you.
That was great. Much clapping from the audience, yay. All right, so questions for the both of you, if you'll unmute yourselves. So you're both published by Apprentice House, which is a student-run press. It's the nation's first entirely student-managed book publisher. Students at Loyola University, Maryland are responsible for every aspect of the publishing process, from acquisitions to design and publication of every book. So that's pretty cool, and a very different experience, I would imagine. And what was that like working with a student-run press for I see, Jessica, you're unmuted, so why don't we ask you first, Jessica?
Well, it was an adventure, really, because it was really different from, so my first book was published by a conventional publisher, I should say. And my second book, to be honest, I pitched 90 agents, all of whom declined my project. And so at that point, I decided I would research small presses and presses that didn't require an agent. And so I found Apprentice House because someone I knew had published a book through them. And immediately they got back to me and said, yes. And I was thrilled. I was absolutely thrilled. And I think there's a place for everyone in the publishing world. There's a place for the big five. There's a place for the big houses. And there's also a place for small presses that are willing to take on stories that might not be the mainstream conventional story, perhaps. So I was very grateful to them. I would say it was very energetic. I really love working with students because, you know, it was like, well, I have finals now. And then COVID hit and everybody had to go home and like nobody had a computer or, you know, it was just really, it was kind of unnavigated territory, but they were amazing. They were flexible and they were so supportive. So I can say all good things about them. It was an adventure and a very, very happy adventure for me.
Cool, that's great to hear. How fun. And Katey, both of your books were on Apprentice House, right?
Yes, yeah. Yes, they were. I think I would just add that in particular, because as it so happens, the content on my first two books looks at the conflicts that have been happening in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2001. The fact that readers who had come of age during the global war on terror chose my books really meant a lot to me. And then second, that those readers were backed by trained professionals in the field and a university board and an editorial board. And, you know, I feel like I got the best of both worlds because I feel very vetted and supported by a university press and an independent press, but I also feel sort of vetted and supported, for lack of a better way of putting it, by like boots on the ground. You know, kids in the most respectable sense of the word, kids who have grown up with this war as a backdrop their whole lives.
Yeah, that's really cool. All right, great. Another question for the both of you. Both of your novels have, I think, characters that are written about from other cultures. Katey, I think 2 of your 3 characters are Afghani, and Jessica, you have one of your mothers from Guatemala. So how did you approach writing about other cultures? What was that like for you, Jessica?
Okay, well, so I'm an adoptive mother, and a number of people on this call are involved in adoption, and they all know this. So, but I'm going to explain this to people who may not know. And that is, in the world of adoption, we have an expression that we call the triad. And the triad is the 3 main characters involved in adoption, which is the child who is adopted, the mother who gives birth to the child, who either called the mother, the birth mother, the first mother, and then the adoptive mother. So there are 3 very, very strong characters and voices in that triad. And then we have something that is one step out from the triad, which is the constellation. And the constellation is all of you, all of our friends, all of our cousins, all of our extended family, the extended family in Guatemala, the aunties, the uncles. It's a big group. So when I was an adoptive mother at this point, you know, I had 2 kids from Guatemala, and I was thinking about a novel. I had written a memoir, but there was other subjects I really wanted to amplify. And there were subjects I was thinking about, and I thought, how can I tell that story? And around this time, I watched, you guys probably have seen Chimamanda Adichie's The Danger of the Single Story. her famous TED Talk or her essay, which is, and there's been other stuff written about this, sort of the idea that in order to tell a well-rounded story, you can't just tell one point of view, you have to tell multiple points of view. And that's certainly how I felt about adoption, that it could only be told not only from the woman who adopts the baby, but from the woman who gives birth to the baby. That was the only way we were going to get a whole story here. So, and then what I did next was, of course, like any fiction writer, when you decide to invent a character, you do a lot of research. And for me, I go to Guatemala every year. I immerse myself in the culture, but more than that, I read diaries. I read diaries in translation from indigenous language to Spanish to English. I read diaries of collected letters of a nun who was a Marinol sister during the conflict in Guatemala. So I watched testimonies during the Rios Montt trial of the genocide in Guatemala. So there was a lot of background information that I was just kind of storing in my brain. And then I sat down and wrote the book. I hope that explains. So very carefully, how did I approach the other? With respect and with care, and I hope with due diligence and with as much research as was humanly possible from where I was.
Yeah, yeah. Did you talk to Guatemalan mothers who gave up their kids for adoption, or did you not?
Thank you for asking that. I should have said that. Well, so we're in reunion with both of our children's mothers, so I know both of them. This story is not based on either one of those people's stories specifically. This story is based on many, many stories. I'm part of a huge adoption community. So in fact, I've heard dozens of stories. So yes, it's based on stories I have heard, and also the details of the conflict. When I was in Guatemala, I met people who have lived through the conflict, who had survived the conflict, and who were willing to talk to me. I just want to quickly tell you this one story, which was we had hired a driver to go up to Neba. So I went to places that were sites in the book, and the driver, who after 10 days of being in the same car, probably about day 5, he started saying, well, when I was a boy, when I was 10, I was living in this place, and here's what happened. And, you know, so stories like that were really, really powerful for me, these first-person accounts. And I was able to draw on those. And also listening to testimonials of people in Guatemala telling their stories as well. So yes, thank you for asking. Yes, first-person accounts.
Wonderful, that's great. And how about for you, Katey, your Afghani characters?
Yeah, pretty different. So Flashes of War is a flash fiction and short story collection that features stories with characters on all sides of conflict: military spouses, civilian children, soldiers, Taliban members, you know, platoon leaders, all across the whole spectrum. And then I had done enough research. I tell people that it took so much, it took like a year to get my characters dressed, like in believable ways. And then 6 more months to make them walk. And then like another 2 years to get them to like talk and do things that were believable. It would have been easier to put penguins on Mars. Like basically, I was writing so far away from my experience. But once I had so much of that research done, there were several characters that never left me alone, and those 3 emerged into the novel for this 3-day-long adventure where you learn how their lives eventually intersect. I am not from I don't identify as someone who's from a military family. I've never been to the Middle East. I did not know a single veteran of the conflicts in Iraq or Afghanistan before I published my first book. So I really had a lot to learn. It's a whole separate question. There's 2 questions going on here, Michael. There's sort of like, how do you research? And then there's like, what authorization do you have to write about the other, right? So the how do you research, if someone really wants to know, I'll answer that separately. And the sort of hotter topic, I'll just be a little more vulnerable and offer what I can, which is to say that really quoting one of my mentors, Jack Driscoll, the impulse to write is nothing other than the impulse to love. And when we're creating art of any kind from that place, I feel okay. I don't feel like I'm going to steal something from someone else. Empathy is the opposite of exploitation. At the same time, we do have to do our due diligence. I am privileged to be able to say what I want to say in a first world country, and not be slaughtered for it. Some of my characters would have been. I am privileged to be able to submit my work and get it out to people and to meet with perfect strangers. That is not something that my real to life 17-year-old main character Asaya really could have had in her life. So just sort of keeping that in check is pretty humbling. And I did do my part to read some first-person accounts, but big surprise, they're very hard to find with regard to Afghan voices and in particular women. So I approached it the way that I approach any kind of writing, which is always writing about the other. Even in memoir, we are writing about the other. We are othered to ourselves. So I approach it with curiosity. I approach it with absolute admiration and obsession for the well-written sentence, right? That shouldn't change, no matter who our character is. And I approach it really with a balance of, you know, curiosity and research, and then where those two sort of meet, a door can open. And that's where the story's waiting for me.
Very nicely put. So what was the original source of your curiosity? If you have no military history in your background, what led you to that?
It started with language. So I'm the philosophy major who was terrified of the English department as an undergrad, like terrified enough to never legit take a lit class since I was 18 years old. But I really love language and the power of language. And my parents are both English majors. So I kind of, you know, I definitely had books and an appreciation for literature in there. But I was curious about the ways in which the language of the global war on terror was changing culture, changing the brain development of, you know, some of my cousins who are much, much younger than me. And I'm still very concerned about that. The ways that we use words like truth, patriot, infidel, terrorist. So it started with language, and then language became the gateway to metaphor. This is going to get really abstract, but a metaphor is when you compare two things that you don't typically think of comparing, right? So when you do that, when you put one thing up against another that doesn't seem like they should go, what you have is friction. And that's the beginning of plot. So that was how I found my way in. I also had questions about the wars, and I didn't want to answer them. I wasn't satisfied by the answers I was finding in reporting, even the very best of reporting, of which there's plenty, but more issues of the human heart. And so I had to sort of imagine my way in. With regard to the novel, Still Come Home, it was much more specifically triggered. And if I'm not going on too long, I could say just briefly how that, okay. So in 2009, there was a breaking news about host nation trucking and the realities of like the fact that U.S. troops, all troops in the countries that they're invading or whatever word you want to use for it, they need their supplies, right? So they need their porta potties, they need their meals, they need their ammo. And the U.S. Department of Defense uses U.S. cash to hire trucking companies. In the case of Afghanistan, Afghan-owned companies. So they give them US dollars. Those companies take the dollars and they say, okay, we will take these dollars, and they're a lot of dollars, and we will get your soldiers what they need. And the US says, okay, contract done. What those companies have to do to get those supplies there is a lot different than what you might expect. They don't just drive them there. They have to bribe local warlords to get through. They have to go this way or that way. Well, who are the warlords talking to? In a lot of cases, in the case of Oruzgan province, they're talking to the Taliban. And so you have US dollars going into the hands of Taliban, the Taliban planting IEDs, and those IEDs blowing up the soldiers that were trying to get the food to. So that was really interesting to me in horrible, heartbreaking ways. And I wanted to trace a dollar. And I wanted to watch it trickle down and see how it would impact lives on all sides of that dollar and on all sides of that kind of IED. So it's based on fact. One day this novel will be historical fiction, and I look forward to that day when it's history.
That's a great approach. Thanks for sharing that. All right, should we open it up to questions in the chat from the audience? Yes, we should. Folks, type in your questions there in the chat. I'll be happy to read them to one or both authors. I see at least one person actively typing. There we go. Thanks, Nancy. Nancy Devine, how many revisions did you go through? And is that for one person or another? Either of them. Okay, great.
I probably rewrote the book. I mean, rewrote it from 4 times. Really rewrote it. And I can't even count my revisions, thousands. So yeah, that's a really good question. That's something that, you know, when the finished book, you forget all of that, but it was a long haul. I even had extra characters who didn't make the final cut. You know, I mean, thousands of words developing this character who then you slash out and they end up on the floor. So 4 complete rewrites and tens of thousands of revisions.
And what prompted those different stages? Were you in a writing group, working with the editors, working with the press?
No, I would, no, all of this happened before the press. So really by the time the press saw the book, I had worked out all of my problems. And, you know, they always say, don't send out the book prematurely. And I probably did send it out to a number of people prematurely. I will say that. I thought it was finished, and then I realized based on feedback that it wasn't finished. And I think that's something that a lot of writers discover, or some writers discover. I certainly discovered. I thought I was finished and I wasn't. So it was really based on feedback from beta readers, really good readers that I had. Some people would say, this is stopping me, this is slowing me. And then I really had to listen to that. I had trusted people and I listened to them. And that's what provoked the changes.
Good, yeah. Excellent. And Katey?
I revised the novel about 8 times over 6 years. So I would say I wrote it through 5 times. And then the 6, 7, and 8, the changes, I feel like they were the hardest changes to make. And there was like very little evidence of it. You know, the word count would change by like 4. but the impact of the changes I was making was quite necessary. So about 8 times total over 6 years.
Yeah. And same follow-up question for you. Was that based on what kind of feedback and from whom?
A few very trusted writer friends. And in some cases, major rewrites or a shift related to like the main level plot, because I got information from veterans who I had met on the tour for the first book, which was so helpful. And actually it was, I don't know that the idea ever would have struck me as like story worthy, but when I was the United States Air Force Academy, read the first book and I got to go there, which was unbelievable. And during dinner, one of the dinners, I was eating with a gentleman whose rank I've long forgotten, but I should be able to properly say it, and I can't. Point being, military culture, I should be able to say it, and I've forgotten. But he, you know, trained his whole career to fly whatever those huge helicopters are, like cargo sized. And what he ended up doing was flying pallets of money back and forth That's what he was doing, under dark, like risking his life, like cold hard cash, stacks of it.
Wow.
I mean, I just never forgot that when he told me that. And then I think a while later, I read that article in The Nation, and it was just like, okay, I gotta do something with this.
Cool. All right, we do have some other questions over here I saw. Let me scroll back up here. The versions, and then Sharon Takaoka wants to know, hi, great readings. Tell us about your process. Are you big on outlining, or do you discover plot as you go? That's a good one for either of you.
That's a great question. So I did have an outline. I have learned the hard way that an outline works for me. I knew that I was going to write about the conflict in Guatemala because I believe that the disruption to the society is what led to the widespread adoption of infants and babies in the late 1990s and early 2000s. So I knew that the conflict was the overarching idea for me. So the question was, how do I make that? How do I intersperse the conflict into this story? So yes, I had an outline. I veered from it drastically as the book grew. I would literally have dreams that would come to me and say, the scene would just appear, and it was in my subconscious. So I'm a big believer in outlines, but I'm also a big believer, for me, of not staying wedded to the outline and being open to the idea of serendipity when it happens.
Cool. And for you, Katey, you an outliner?
No, I did have to write. I had the big thing for me with this was teaching myself to write long. So Flashes of War, most of the stories are like 2 pages. And before I wrote this novel, the longest story I'd ever written was 18 pages. Most of them were like 12, and so this is over 200. So that was my main thing, was really, really exhaling in a way on the page that is necessary in novels that you can't do in shorter works. And so learning the building blocks of prose to get started, and those of you that are mired in drafts, I'll offer this. If you go to my blog and you type in the little search field for the blog, revising the novel Ursula Hegyi, Hegi, you'll pull up a couple blog posts where they're total confessions, where I tell what I was doing, locked away in this office, terrified that the prose police were going to come and get me in the very, very first version of the novel, because I didn't really know structure in that length. I was mimicking Ursula Hegyi's structure of one of her novels that takes place in one day, which at the time I thought my novel would take place in one day. Now it takes place in 3. So I thought, of course, this was totally against the law, which it's not. Structure is not copyrighted. And also I rewrote it 8 times after that, and it looks totally different. But what I did process-wise in order to teach myself structure was borrow someone's at first to fill it in with the content, because it's so hard to manage both at the same time. And then later, when a structure started to reveal itself to me, not in outline format, just kind of intuitively, oh, the plot is developing, I need more than 1 day, I need 3 days. I let that structure go, that could fall away, but I knew my characters then. So I could more confidently express what needed to be expressed and go on longer.
Cool. I love hearing about writers' processes. That was fun. Thank you. Question for Jessica. Have either of your children read the book?
That's a really interesting question. No, and I don't expect they ever will. Because my memoir, for example, is written about my daughter, who's 18, and she has never read it. It's interesting. We talk about adoption a lot. We visit Guatemala a lot. And sometimes I think it's just enough. And no, they haven't read it. Maybe they will someday. But I followed the advice of, I think it was Amy Tan, who famously said, you have to write as if you have no one in your life. You can't, I couldn't think about what my children might think or what someone else might think. I had to just allow myself to tell the story without any external judgment. So no, they haven't read the book. Maybe someday they will.
So another question for you, Jessica. This is from Sharon McCarthy. Did the story come to you first and then you developed the characters, or did you start with Rosa Alba and then write the story from there?
That's a really interesting question. And that really brings in the idea of serendipity, which is what I was talking about earlier. So I had, like a lot of people who have adopted children from Guatemala and know something about Guatemala, they are very interested in the armed conflict, which we often refer to as a civil war, but it was a 36-year armed conflict. And so I knew that that had to be the inciting incident. So I remember this vividly when Rosalba is the mother of the baby in Guatemala. I remember vividly when she showed up, because I was writing this scene in the library, I remember that. And I wrote this scene, which was a massacre scene, which at the time was the beginning of the book. And all of a sudden, the last line came to me, the baby was alive. There was a baby who had survived. And I had not even imagined that. I had not imagined a baby. I had not imagined a survivor, but that just idea came to me and that became a character. So no, the book came to me first, the idea, and then she showed up.
Cool. All right, this question is for both of you from Karen Sukenik. When writing about topics that may be contentious, one needs a thick skin. How did the process of birthing your novel thicken your skin?
Well, I'll just say quickly, as an adoptive parent who writes about adoption, and I published my memoir in 2010, and from that time, I've really been very involved in the dialogue around international adoption, and my views on international adoption have shifted very dramatically over the last nearly 20 years, I will say. So yes, I have developed a thick skin because people have very strong opinions and I want to learn from those opinions. I want to learn what people have to say. I want to learn what people who are adopted have to say, who are...
Oh, you're breaking up there, you're paused. Hopefully Jessica will come back to it soon.
I don't respond to, I can take it, I guess. So yeah, a thick skin.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You, Katey?
Yeah, I think the thick skin comes into play really after it comes out. And for me, it really just had more to do with endurance, perhaps because I went a little crazy on my first book tour with events. So you have to sort of learn how to, sometimes with some audiences, although I will say not this evening, you have to learn how to understand what someone's actually asking. So that required something of me that I hadn't anticipated. And I will say there were a couple times, because publishing in general is a male-dominated industry, and then military is also male-dominated, and then war literature is also male-dominated. There were some times when I felt a little bit outduded, but I kind of had this civilian card in my back pocket. Call it luck, I don't know, but whatever I did it well enough that I could hang with those guys long enough on a panel and not get slammed against a wall and actually win a couple people over who maybe had walked into the room thinking it wasn't possible to reach that far. So if I got a thicker skin, it was, like later at the bar alone when I realized what I'd gone through.
All right. Let's see, from Kaylee Zaloga. How do you handle writing dialogue for a character whose way of speaking is unfamiliar to you? For example, a character whose first language isn't English or whose dialect isn't one you really know well. I'm wondering how you go about crafting language that is true to them. For either of you, I suppose.
You know, that's a real question about voice. And voice, as all writers know and all readers know, is really a critical element of a character. So voice is something we as writers really, really focus on. And it's probably the essential element. So, I mean, just speaking for me, my voice that I had to find was an indigenous woman in Guatemala. And I'm very lucky because I know indigenous women from Guatemala. So I'm able to observe a kind of stillness that I see in the characters, a kind of straightforwardness that I observe. And I was able to imbue the character with that, I hope, a kind of directness. And so Rosalba, who's my main character, who is indigenous, Ixil Maya, her voice came to me very strongly eventually. I felt like, honestly, I really knew who that voice was. So that's a great question. I think from observing, also from watching Rigoberta Menchú, who is the Nobel laureate from Guatemala. I've watched her speak many, many, many times. I've watched, you know, videos of her. And she has a very, very strong, very distinctive speaking voice. And I also thought about her. So I would recommend to any writers out there, try to find examples of voices and try to embody those voices in your own body and then put it out there.
Good advice, yeah. Katey?
I guess I would add on to that. There's this idea that voice, that we have to, it means we have to choose the right words. But for me, I have to feel that character, I have to feel them in my body. So researching primary sources is a good starting point. For example, I think of a quote, many quotes and images when I was researching the first book, just, I never forgot. And one of them was just some sort of like documentary clip on YouTube or something that I found. And it was man in Afghanistan, and I don't even remember what he was asked, but he just looks at the camera and he says, "Since my brother died, I cannot taste anything. Since my brother died, I cannot taste my tea." So, well, the cadence and repetition of that is interesting to me and alluring as a writer, but I don't want to write his story. And there's something under that, right? Like, what would that feel like to exist in the world with something as simple as not being able to taste your tea, just taken from you? To feel that and then write from that place. From there, I'm not going to say something romantic like the words just come. Okay, they don't. But when whatever words need to come do come, I feel like it's easier to be certain about them because of where it stems from, right?
Cool. All right. Deborah Jane, your publicist, wants to know, what projects are you working on now? Either of you?
Getting my daughter to graduate from high school.
That's a good project.
Getting my kids to get through online school this year. Getting my book out into the world. I feel, you know, it's interesting. I'm so looking forward to having more brain space now that this book is done. I've spent 7 years working on it, which is almost embarrassing to admit, but that's just how it goes. And it's almost like I don't know what to work on now because I haven't even allowed myself to think about that. But I look forward to that. I look forward to allowing my brain to be open to that idea. So right now I'm writing short things. I'm writing short essays. I'm writing short blog posts for people in conjunction with this book. That's what I'm writing, but I haven't thought about a big novel, although I've now written 2 books about Guatemala. this morning when I was walking my dog, my husband said to me, well, what about a trilogy? And I was like, oh, easy for you to say, Tim. Anyway, so I don't know what's next, something I hope.
Cool. Katey?
That's such a kind question. Yeah, there's nothing like those first few years after a book comes out. It's like, I tell people it's like a 5-year pass. Oh, it's so awesome. You're just off the hook for like 5 years, especially that first year. Like, I'm writing whatever I want and I'm reading whatever I want. I'm working on short stories. They're set in Appalachia. I've got maybe 140 pages of that. And then there's this other story that wants to be longer, and I'm not going to say that NOVEL word out loud because I know what that takes now, and that's kind of terrifying, but that one's at about 80 pages. So we'll see. But for those of you who are writers, I'll say I am consciously trying to write out of order. And it's really fun. It's a fun challenge. And so I'm kind of like writing thematically or like hopping around at different time periods, and my transitions are really heinous, you know, like things I would never let myself do before. But it's time to change. It's time to shake it up. And I knew if I took that one thing away from myself that my writing would change. So that's what I'm working on.
Nice, good to shake things up. Well, I think that was probably a good final question for the evening. We're at 6:58. Thank both of you so much for reading your wonderful works and for sharing your insights. And thanks to everyone in the audience for showing up and asking great questions and being supportive. I will post a link once again here in the chat for you to zip on over to Annie Bloom's. Both of the books are on the event page there that I just posted in the chat, so you can go over there and buy books for yourself and for others. And yeah, thanks again, everyone. It was a great event. Thanks so much for coming. And we hope to see you at another event soon.
Thank you so much. And congrats again, Jessica.
Yeah, congrats, Jessica. It's great.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting us. It was a real thrill. And Katey, thank you for joining me. I'm honored. So, and all you guys who showed up, thank you so much. I'm feeling the support and the love, and it's wonderful. I wasn't sure what it would feel like, but it actually feels great. So thank you for being here.
Good. The way it should be.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Good night.